In early hours of a Tuesday, December 2009, a Google security analyst was reviewing routine network logs, but suddenly she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Buried in millions of lines of data was a pattern that shouldn't exist. Someone was inside Google's most secure systems, moving through their network like they owned it, and they had been there for months. This wasn't just any company, this was Google, the keeper of humanity's digital secrets. But as she dug deeper into those logs, she uncovered something that would change cybersecurity forever. This wasn't random. This wasn't some kid in a basement. This was warfare, silent, invisible, and already underway. This is the story of Operation Aurora, the hack that taught us that, in the digital age, your worst enemy may not be the one you see coming. To understand how this breach happened, we need to go back to mid-2009, a time when Google stood almost untouchable. It was the undisputed giant of the internet, handling over 3 billion searches a day and dominating 65% of the global search market. But beneath that success, something was quietly unraveling. Tensions were rising, and in the shadows of that digital empire, someone was already inside. By 2006, Google had entered the Chinese market, but the relationship was complicated. The Chinese government demanded strict censorship, no results about human rights, no talk of democracy, and nothing that challenged the party line. Google agreed, reluctantly, but it was an uneasy compromise. Then, in the summer of 2009, Google's security team started noticing something strange, unusual network activity. At first, it looked like the usual suspects, maybe someone trying to steal credit card numbers or personal data. But as they dug deeper, they realized this was something entirely different. The attackers weren't rushing. They weren't sloppy. They had patience, sophisticated tools, and resources that suggested this wasn't some teenager in a basement. This was a chess match, and Google was just beginning to realize they were playing against a grandmaster. But who was this grandmaster, and what did they want? The answers would reveal a story of corporate espionage, state-sponsored hacking, and a new kind of warfare that most people didn't even know existed. The attack began with something deceptively simple, an email. But this wasn't spam or a random phishing attempt. The hackers had done their homework. They studied Google employees, researched their interests, social media profiles, and work patterns. Then they crafted the perfect trap, personalized emails that looked legitimate, containing links that seemed harmless. When Google employees clicked these links, they thought they were just visiting normal websites, but in reality, they were unknowingly installing secret hacker tools that would give attackers access to one of the world's most valuable companies. But here's where it gets truly frightening. The hackers had discovered what's called a zero-day exploit, a vulnerability in Internet Explorer that even Microsoft didn't know existed. Think of it like having a master key to a building, except the building's owners don't even know that lock exists. When Google employees clicked those links, they unknowingly triggered this hidden vulnerability. In seconds, malicious code slipped past every defense and planted a silent backdoor deep inside their systems. And because it was a zero-day exploit, no antivirus software could detect it. The hackers were essentially invisible. Once inside, the attackers moved with surgical precision. The backdoor granted them near unlimited access to Google's internal network. But they didn't just grab everything and run. That would have been noisy, detectable. Instead, they elevated their privileges, essentially giving themselves administrator access, and then began exploring the network methodically. They were hunting for specific treasure, Google's source code, the secret recipe that makes Gmail, Google Search, and other services work. This intellectual property was worth billions of dollars, but that wasn't their only target. The hackers were also after something more personal and more sinister: the private Gmail accounts of Chinese human rights activists, people who were fighting for democracy and freedom in China. The attackers wanted to know who they were talking to, what they were planning, and how to stop them. As Google's investigation deepened, they made a chilling discovery: they weren't alone. The same attackers had infiltrated Yahoo, Adobe, Dow Chemical, and more than 24 other major American companies. This wasn't random. The target list read like a who's who of American innovation, each company hit with purpose. Tech giants were breached for their source code, financial firms for their trading algorithms, defense contractors for military secrets, and energy companies for the blueprints of national infrastructure. The evidence pointed to a coordinated campaign originating from Beijing, China. Security researchers would later identify the group responsible as Elderwood, a sophisticated hacking organization with ties to the People's Liberation Army. This wasn't corporate espionage anymore. This was cyber warfare, a systematic campaign by the Chinese government to steal American intellectual property, monitor dissidents, and gain strategic advantages in everything from military technology to economic competition. Google's security team worked around the clock to understand the full scope of the breach. They analyzed network logs, traced the attackers' movements, and slowly pieced together the sophisticated operation that had been running under their noses for months. They discovered that the attack had been named Aurora. But more importantly, they faced a crucial decision: stay quiet and hope the attackers would go away, or break the traditional silence around cybersecurity breaches and go public. Most companies that get hacked choose silence. They're afraid of damaging their reputation, scaring customers, or giving competitors an advantage. But Google's leadership made a different choice. On January 12, 2010, Google's chief legal officer, David Drummond, published a blog post that would change everything. In carefully chosen words, he revealed that Google had been the victim of what they called a highly sophisticated and targeted attack on our corporate infrastructure originating from China. The response was immediate and explosive. This wasn't just Google admitting they'd been hacked. This was Google directly accusing the Chinese government of cyber espionage and threatening to pull out of the Chinese market entirely. Google's revelation sent shockwaves through the tech industry. Within days, other companies began coming forward. Yahoo confirmed they'd been hit. Adobe admitted to the breach. Microsoft scrambled to release an emergency patch for the Internet Explorer vulnerability that had made the attacks possible. The US government launched investigations. Diplomatic relations with China grew tense as American officials demanded explanations. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton gave a landmark speech on internet freedom, directly addressing the attacks and calling for consequences. The digital Cold War had begun, and Operation Aurora was its opening shot. Operation Aurora changed cybersecurity forever. It forced companies to acknowledge that they weren't just dealing with random hackers anymore. They were facing nation-states with unlimited resources and sophisticated capabilities. The attack led to the development of new security frameworks like Zero Trust, the principle that you should never trust any user or device, even inside your own network. It sparked the creation of threat intelligence teams whose job is to identify and track advanced persistent threats. Google created its Threat Analysis Group, dedicated to tracking government-backed hackers. The techniques first used in Operation Aurora, spear phishing, zero-day exploits, living off the land, became the standard playbook for state-sponsored cyber operations. Today, we live in the world that Operation Aurora created, a world where corporations know they are targets, where governments wage war through fiber optic cables, and where a single click on a malicious link can compromise national security. The hackers who infiltrated Google didn't just steal source code or spy on activists. They changed the rules of the game forever. They showed us that in the digital age, everyone is a potential target, and every company is a battlefield. The next time you get an unexpected email or see a suspicious link, remember Operation Aurora. Remember that somewhere in the world, sophisticated hackers are still playing the same chess game that began in 2009. The question isn't whether they'll try to hack you, it's whether you'll be ready when they do.